And so here we are. The mystery at the manor almost solved. Chapter 18. Digging for treasure. When Beth awoke the following morning, she ran into Pip's bedroom straight away. He had been fast asleep, but Beth, eagerly bursting into his room, immediately roused him. "What on earth's the matter?" he asked groggily, his hair all tousled and spiky. "Pip," she began, "I think we need to go back and have another look down the woodland path for the treasure," she blurted out. "I'm sure we just missed it last night. I was dreaming and—" "I think you still are," interrupted Pip, not too happy at being woken up by this crazy idea. "Last night you were sure the treasure was in the kitchen garden, and then you couldn't make up your mind which way we should be going." Beth realised that she probably needed to start at the beginning and explain how she'd arrived at her suggestion. She hadn't realised how far her ideas had changed in the last few hours. So she began by telling him how the trees in the orchard seemed to be in a familiar order to her last night. But when she started to give Pip details of her dream, he became quite impatient. "There is nothing more boring than listening to someone else's dreams," he said. "No, but," continued Beth, "if I hadn't woke up thinking about lists of flowers, I don't think I would have made the connection with the list of the leaves in the diary. And I was right. The trees in the orchard are exactly the same as those in the book, right up to the hawthorn hedge with the gap in it where we ran last night. Then it was too dark for me to properly see which trees came next. Look," she said, showing him the list of trees. Pip was awake enough now to follow her logic. "You mean you think that last night, when we were on our way home, we were actually going in the right direction?" he asked. "That's right," she answered. "So come on then," he said, immediately swinging his legs out of bed. "Let's go and see if you're right." "Wait a minute," she said, feeling at once pleased that he thought her idea was worth following up, but also aware that she might not have it quite right. "We'd better take along the list of clues, then we can check things as we go along," she said. "Good idea," said Pip. "And supposing we really find out where the treasure is hidden today, I'd better get something to dig it up with. One of the clues said something about digging, didn't it?" "I think it did," Beth replied, as she went to collect the things from her room. As she picked up the clue sheet to put with her new list of trees, an idea occurred to her. They had underlined the important words from the Bible verses, but they were still a little hard to see, so now she copied each one next to the leaf names on her new list. It read, "Rose, seek and ye shall find. Damson, down to the garden to the bed of spices. Apple, enter ye at the strait gate. Hawthorn, the steps. Sycamore, turn neither to the left-hand side nor to the right. Beech, under the boughs of a great oak. Oak, for where your treasure is, there will be your heart also." And finally she added, "Follow the squirrel home." It hadn't taken her many minutes, and as she popped both lists into her bag, Pip was calling. It hadn't taken him long either to get dressed and have a quick wash, and now they both ran out through the door, not even waiting for breakfast. Before they dashed up the field, Pip bent down beside the caravan where Gramps kept the gardening tools. "Pip," Beth called before he could get anything, "I've just written out the clues again, but there isn't a verse about digging." Pip stopped in his tracks. "I'm sure there was something about buried treasure," he said. "Well, it's not in the Bible verses," answered Beth. Pip paused for a moment and then remembered. "Right at the beginning, when we found the note in the diary, didn't she say something about her burying it?" "Oh, that's right. I knew it wasn't in the list that I've just copied out," said Beth. Pip bent down again to the tools. He chose a lightweight spade and headed straight off, with Beth a close second. She was carrying her drawing bag, which contained the drawing pad, with both the sheets of clues inside. They had decided that they would go back the way they had returned home last night. That would mean that they wouldn't have to go right up to the front of the house and risk being seen. Even though it was still quite early, there were a few children out, playing by the climbing frame. Pip and Beth were so intent on their errand that they didn't notice Jack, but he saw them. He didn't run over to join them, but watched where they turned into the woodland at the corner of the field, and then he ran off towards his own caravan. Pip and Beth ran up the path to the crossroads, and then turned left towards the orchard and the kitchen garden. As they approached the hawthorn hedge, Pip, who was still leading the way, became aware of singing. He came to a standstill and held up his hand to warn Beth to be quiet. He carefully edged his way up the old steps to the gap in the hedge. He peered through into the orchard, but there was no one around. He indicated to Beth to stay where she was, while he quietly crossed the orchard and peeped through some of the brambles which covered a hole in the walls. Down near the house he could see Catherine, hanging out some washing, singing as she worked. He could see that the basket was still full of clothes, and she only had 4 or 5 towels on the line. He realised that she would be there for quite a while yet, so he crept back to Beth. In whispered tones, they decided to wait just inside the orchard, and under the dappled shade of an ancient apple tree, Beth took out the new list of clues. I copied just the important words onto the list of trees to make it easier, she explained. Good idea, said Pip. Under the rose leaf it says, seek and you shall find, she read. Well, here's hoping we're really going to find something today, Pip responded. Under the damson leaf is a clue about the garden and the spices, she said, where Catherine's busy today by the sound of it. Then under the apple leaf it says about the straight gate, which could be over there. Pip pointed at the narrow gate. If you're right about that, he added. Then under the hawthorn leaf, Beth continued, ignoring his jibe, it talks about the steps. And under the hawthorn hedge, said Pip, becoming more enthusiastic, and now pointing away from the gate towards the hawthorn hedge, there are those old steps leading into the woodland that I found last night. That's right, said Beth, and the next clue is under the sycamore leaf, and I noticed just now that there are lots of sycamore trees just through there. She indicated the gap in the hedge. It was dark last night, so I couldn't identify them. Well, said Pip, let's assume we're on the right track. We probably don't need to go back into the orchard. We could just carry on from here. It is still a bit dark through there, said Beth, so I'll just read the next clues before we go back into the wood. Well, hurry up then, said Pip, who was impatient to be off again. The next leaf is the sycamore, and the clue has a long verse about turning neither to the right or left. Then there's a copper beech leaf, with its long verse about the oak tree, and last of all, the oak leaf, with the verse about the treasure being where the heart is, and finally the thing about following the squirrel home. So let's go down the steps, said Pip, eager to be off. As she glanced one last time at the orchard, Beth was sure that she could almost make out their footprints of last night, still visible in the early morning dew. Pip hadn't run very far before they came to the crossroads, but this time, instead of turning right on the path they'd used last night before, he led the way straight ahead. Turning neither to the right nor the left, he quoted quietly under his breath. They hadn't gone much further before the ground began to slope quite steeply, and they found themselves hurrying down a hill. They scrambled down and almost landed on top of each other among a mound of dark brown beech leaves. They laughed and paused for a minute, dusting the leaves from their clothes. Beth glanced back up the hill and was almost sure she saw a furtive movement in some of the bushes beside a grey tree trunk. She remembered how last night she'd almost thought that there was someone following them. She was about to say something to Pip when he called to her instead. "Look!" he shouted, pointing at an old board which had been partially covered by the leaves. "That sign is almost exactly like the one—" He paused. "In fact, I think—" And they both looked down at the old sign, and then they both recognised the broken down fence behind the pile of leaves. Suddenly they realised they were looking through the fence into their own den. It didn't take them many more minutes to push through the leaves and clamber over the broken fence. They immediately went up to the oak tree. "Well," said Beth, "we've turned neither to the right nor the left, been through the beech trees, and now here is an oak tree. You don't suppose—" Her voice trailed off as she looked over at Pip. "You think our oak tree might be Elizabeth's oak tree?" he asked. Beth looked around the den. "It's the only one around," she said. "So, if this is the right tree, where would she have hidden it?" Pip asked, not really expecting an answer. It seemed a long time since they had really looked at the tree. That first day they had noticed how gnarled and ancient it was, seeing what looked like a lion's head down among the roots. But today they began studying it closely. The top branches were full of leaves, and about halfway up was a hole. "Beth, do you remember the other day we came here, watching the squirrels play, and then they were diving into their nest? Look up there. There is that heart shape that we saw before." "That's right," said Beth. "Do you remember you wanted to call the den Lionheart's Castle?" Sure enough, just by the squirrel's hole there was the strange, black, almost heart-shaped mark that seemed to have been burnt into the trunk. "Just a minute," said Pip. "Isn't there something in the clues about a heart?" "Let's have a look," said Beth. She pulled out the sheet and then read, "For where your treasure is, there will be your heart also." "Then we could start digging right here," said Pip. At once he pushed away some of last year's fallen leaves from the bottom of the tree and began digging. The ground was really quite soft, and soon he had a hole almost half a metre deep. The spade had been sinking easily into the soil every time, but then, as he pushed his foot onto it this last time, it hit something firm. "This is it!" Beth said excitedly, but Pip interrupted her. "It feels more like a tree root, but just a minute." He stopped digging and knelt down beside the hole. "There seems to be something loose underneath these roots," he said, and he began to lift something out of the hole. It was a rectangular bundle covered in leather. He was just about to unwrap it when a stern voice behind him said, "I'll take that." The children looked round in amazement to see Jack's dad holding a cricket bat and looking very fierce. They hadn't heard him enter their den, but Beth instantly wondered if he had been the one that she had heard in the woods late last night and again this morning. "Give it to me," he ordered again, reaching out and grabbing the bundle from Pip, who almost fell over in the tussle. His heart was pounding and his mouth was dry. Jack's dad had been a bit scary the other day, but now Pip was terrified. The old leather slipped through Pip's hands, but before he could react, the whole wood seemed to erupt with noise. Whistles blew, branches cracked, leaves rustled, and men shouted. Jack's dad blanched with fear and turned to run, but before he could take more than a few steps, he was rugby tackled to the ground by a blur of dark-coloured clothing. The first thing that Beth was aware of was Mac suddenly standing right next to her, a caring hand on her shoulder and a police radio in his other hand. Beside him were another couple of police officers in uniform. Jack's dad was being helped, not too gently, to his feet. "I think I'll be the one taking that," Mac said, letting go of Beth and reaching out for the bundle. And then he spoke into his radio. "We have apprehended the suspect. If you want to bring in the transport now to take him away." As his two colleagues handcuffed Jack's dad and ushered him away, Mac looked over at the children. "Well, well," he said. "I didn't expect to be seeing you two again so soon. There was a burglary last night down in Burnham," he explained. "When the locals sent out a description of the driver and his battered old white van, I'd a good idea who we were looking for. We decided to wait until this morning because I had a feeling that he was up to no good here on the site, and I seem to be right about that." "So it was him who was following us," said Beth. "I thought I heard someone last night and again this morning." "And it was probably him who tried to burgle the caravan the other day," added Pip. "The caravan?" queried Mac. "We thought someone had been in, looking for the clues to find that," said Pip, looking down at the leather-covered bundle that Mac was still holding. Mac looked down at the parcel he held in his hand. "Well now, and would this be the treasure that you two have been seeking?" he asked, with a smile in his green eyes. "Well, yes," began Pip. "At least, that's what we were hoping." Mac held out the leather-covered bundle towards Pip. "Well, as you found it, I think it's probably yours. Are you going to open it?" Pip took the packet in amazement. "Wow!" he said. "Can we really open it now?" "I don't see why not," Mac confirmed. And so Pip began to unroll the thick, dark leather covering to find out what was inside.